Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to everybody and good night to those in America. My name is Yossi Kuperwasser and I'm the head of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. And we are here to discuss exactly 2 weeks after Bondi beach attack. We are here to discuss the ways of combating anti-Semitism after Bondi. With the assumption that the Bondi attack was so shocking that things cannot continue to be the same after it. As the minister joining us.
Hello, Boker.
Good morning. So we actually in the JISS held a webinar on this issue exactly 5 months ago. On July 31st, we held a meeting discussing the future of anti-Semitism and delegitimization and what needs to be done about it with Professor Alan Dershowitz, with Mr. Adam Winstein, and with Michal Kotler-Wunsch, which is the special envoy for countering and combating anti-Semitism on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Israel. And we came up with all kinds of ideas of things that should be done. And when I say it, I know that when everybody speaks about the fact that the writing was on the wall, the writing was on the wall. We discussed all of these matters 5 months ago, and nothing is surprising. And nevertheless, we are totally shocked with what happened. We are shocked, I think, with 2 elements. First, the convergence between anti-Semitism and terrorism and Islamic terrorism. We, as state apparatuses, we were trained to deal with Islamic terrorism. We knew what needs to be done. We are fighting against terror for ages. And the states involved spent a lot of money in trying to be better equipped to fight against terrorism. When this converged with anti-Semitism, we were totally shocked and surprised because we thought these are 2 parallel issues. And it turns out that these 2 are the same issue, and we have to fight anti-Semitism the way we fight terrorism, which is something that was not accepted by many until recently, including the State of Israel. And the second reason is that we were all the time waiting for the point in time in which the West would understand that anti-Semitism, together with terrorism, is a threat to the West and not only a threat to the Jews. And we again found that many people in the West speak about the need to fight anti-Semitism, but they don't see it as their own problem. They see it as a problem of the Jews. And this is something that struck us when we looked at what happened in Bondi Beach, when we lost 15 people, 15 Jews massacred by Islamic terrorists, and people understood that this is happening not only in Israel, it's happening all over the world, and it's going to harm the security of everybody, not only of the Jews. And in order to discuss what is this situation going to imply for everybody in the future in fighting terrorism and anti-Semitism, we have gathered here a group of experts that will shed light on this matter. We shall have with us Minister Amichai Chikli from Israel, is the Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs and of Combating Anti-Semitism and Delegitimization of Israel, formerly social and community leader and major in the military, in special units in the military. So he knows something about combating. We have with us Lamm, Dr. Lamm, who is the president of the board of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He's a Zionist leader of Australian Jewry for a long time, and he is the vice chairman of the World Mizrahi Organization and former president of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. We have with us retired Major General Yaakov Amidror, very well known to everybody, is the Ann and Greg Rosshandler Senior Fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. and he was the national security advisor for Prime Minister Netanyahu for a couple of years, and he was my commander as director of the Intelligence Analysis Division in the Military Intelligence. And we have with us Dr. Jacob Dallal, who is a research fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, and he's also the managing director of the Comper Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism and Racism at the University of Haifa. So each brings with him an angle specific for him, and we shall start with Minister Chikli, whom I would like to ask you, Minister, what is your take of what's happening right now in this battle against anti-Semitism? What are the developments that are taken from the Bondi Beach attack, and what is the future for this matter, and what needs to be done? Most importantly, what needs to be done in order to make sure that all the bad things that can happen will not materialize. Please, Minister Chikli.
So, Brigadier General Kuperwasser and dear friends, it's an honor to speak with this group. I will speak very shortly and very tachlis, as we say in Hebrew. I'm not going to go into the philosophical reasons and why and how and everything that consider these aspects of anti-Semitism. I want to focus on the practical level and to compare different states and how they handle with anti-Semitism. So we can see that there is a huge difference in between states like Canada, Australia, Britain, and, for instance, other countries such as the US, such as Germany, not to mention Central European countries such as Czech Republic, Hungary, etc., etc. And when you look worldwide on the map of combating anti-Semitism, you can clearly see that the number one element to effectively combat anti-Semitism is immigration policies. Number one. Why? Because the serious attacks are not coming from just people who have, let's say, bad views regarding the Jews. It's not coming from the far right, despite the fact that the far right can be very dangerous. The vast majority of deadly attacks against Jewish communities coming from Islamists. We saw it in Manchester, we saw it in Bondi Beach, and we saw it in many other cases in Europe and in the US in the past. So therefore, when you have strict immigration policies, you don't have these ghettos where you have a large Muslim community who are isolated from the rest of society and are easy to be, let's say, radicalized through activities in the mosques led by Qatar or Turkey or Al Jazeera, etc. And therefore, the safest capitals now, the safest countries for Jews are the states of Central Europe, Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary. We all remember the past. It wasn't like that in the past, not at all. But we are speaking about the present. So the strict policies of Budapest, of Czech, and of Poland, it creates, let's say, a safe situation, relatively safe situation, comparing to other European countries. This is number one, immigration. Second component is leadership, and how is the government address incitement, hate speech, and what's the level of intelligence and counter-terror activities. Here you have countries that open their borders to immigration, but are very strict on incitement. Very good example is Germany. In Germany, you can go out and say from the river to the sea, you can go out and shout, globalize the Intifada. So you have many Muslims migrants, you have these ghettos, dangerous ghettos. We've seen terror attacks on Christmas markets recently in Germany. It's not hermetic, but there is a serious effort by the government to block the option of violent demonstrations, incitement in public sphere, and this is very, very important. You can see the same in the US with the new administration, Trump administration, with the attempt to deport the leaders of the demonstrations of pro-Hamas and Hezbollah in US campuses, and heavy effort to punish universities who failed their Jewish students during the war. And so you can see Germany and the US, states that still have quite a large number of Muslim migrants, but they are very, very strict on incitement. Third, let's say there is the spirit of the government, okay? The spirit of the government in Australia was extremely hostile to the Jewish community. When you recognize a Palestinian state, when you have hostages still in the dungeons of Hamas, when you have a state, a government recognizing a Palestinian state, and Hamas is praising this government, when you have demonstrations on Sydney's Bridge with shouting to globalize the Intifada, and instead of pushing back and saying this is unacceptable and we do not accept the presence of Al-Qaeda flags, ISIS flags, Hamas flags on Sydney's Bridge, we do not accept the terms as globalize the Intifada, you have the leaders of Australia and Albanese saying this was a moment of unity in Australia. It's insane. So that's the spirit of the government. So therefore, Canada and Australia and France and Britain are currently the worst places for Jews when you look globally at what's going on anti-Semitism. So to summarize, number one is immigration. Number two, how do you address jihadist and terror incitement? Do you have legislation? Do you have efforts to ban these calling for globalize the Intifada? Do you have activities against Hamas cells? We saw what happened yesterday, by the way, in Italy. Also a good example, with the arrest of Muhammad Khanoun in trying to block Hamas activity within Italy. So this is also a good example. So going back, I'm saying immigration, how do you address incitement? How do you address the presence of Hamas, Samidun, all these kind of organizations? One more example in Belgium, Indrijab, basically a Hezbollah-oriented organizations who openly activating in Belgium with no problem. They have zero problem to act in the capital of Belgium. They are going after IDF soldiers, promoting Islamist ideology, promoting Hezbollah, and they are in a safe haven. For us to go to Belgium is more difficult than for Hezbollah supporters. So Belgium is another horrific example of a failed state in terms of combating anti-Semitism and combating terror. So this is how I see it, let's say, on the very, very tachlis dimension. And also, there's the end of the process is the terror attack itself. Do you have a trained police force who can be relevant when you have a terror attack? Now, there was no surprise that a jihadist terror attack might occur in Australia. We've saw attempts to burn synagogues with the people inside. We have seen targeting of the leaders of the Jewish community. The writing was on the wall. The writing was on the wall. It was clear that it is a very dangerous moment for the Jewish community in Australia. And still, for 12 minutes in a big event on a public sphere, you had zero relevant, let's say, response from the police. So yes, policemen were injured. We have Scott. I don't recall his last name, but I visited him in the hospital, and we wish him a full recovery. But it's not enough. It's not enough for 12 minutes to with 2 shotguns, which is it's a lousy weapon, okay, for a mass killing. It's not M16 that you can kill 50 people in 2 minutes. Shotgun. It's like, it's like a hunting in the woods. And nothing has been done to stop it. So you have a failed police force who is irrelevant and incapable of responding to the threat. That's the end of the process. But this is also something which is meaningful. And what we're doing, by the way, is to try, and we are bringing delegations of police forces. We had the Czech with us a few weeks ago. We had Argentina before. We had NYPD before. And to train them here in Israel with police forces to make them more aware and relevant. And that is generally how I see it. Immigration, legislation against incitement, operations against Hamas cells, terror cells, Islamic propaganda within your state, and at the end, a relevant police force that can actually do something when you have a terror attack.
Is there anything Israel can do more than what it does now in order to improve the conditions on those 3 or 4 arenas?
Look, we share intelligence. We share a report about Hamas in Italy a year ago. I'm very happy that yesterday we saw arrest. There were warnings coming from Israel regarding Australia at the highest level. You had the prime minister writing to Albanese. The writing is on the wall. The prime minister used the research of the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs with all the statistics, saying to the Australian government, look what's going on. And unfortunately, they've done nothing with it. So Israel cannot replace the police forces in Australia. It cannot replace the police forces in Amsterdam. But as we did in Amsterdam, we had a concrete alert on the assault on Maccabi fans. But still, it was not enough. It was not enough. Why? Because we cannot replace the police forces on the ground. So I think we are making huge effort. We are doing everything we can to prevent anti-Semite and terror attack against the Jewish communities, but we cannot replace the local police and security forces.
Thank you. We'll come back to you later. Lamm, Dr. Lamm, please.
Shalom, everybody. At the outset, I would like to thank Minister Chikli for coming on to this webinar, but more importantly, as Minister of Diaspora Affairs, immediately flying to Australia to be connected to the Jewish community there. We are brought up to believe, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh, that we all care about and are connected to each other, Jewry worldwide. And diaspora Jewry was very affected by what took place on October the 7th and subsequently. And now we see that Israel has exactly the same concern for diaspora Jewry. The minister has identified very succinctly the important elements that enabled what took place to take place here in Australia. But there's a history that goes back where terror has taken place, where it's been instigated from outside. In 1987, I think, there were 2 bombings. There was the bombing of the Consul General of Israel in Sydney, and then the bombing of the Hakoah Club in Bondi. When I was president of the Zionist movement in 2003, I was contacted by ASIO, the Australian Security Information Organisation, which at that time said that Al-Qaeda's number one target in Australia is Beth Weitzman Community Centre in Melbourne. And they tipped us off that through their investigations of prisoners in Guantanamo Bay that we were a target. And from that point in time, we sought to buttress the security of Beth Weitzman. We were told by Victorian police, there's no risk of terror in Australia. They knew better. And since that time, the original event in Sydney was in 1982, I'm corrected. And since that time, we have become aware of terror cells in Australia and the potential. And we have advanced increased security on all Jewish institutions. We have to do it and we cannot desist from doing it. But with this government that's been elected, we face a different threat. We face a threat of a government that simply wishes to ignore what it is told. The Australian security organisations, ASIOs and the others, they are aware, they are connected to Israel and to the information that comes. But this government refused to acknowledge it or do anything about it, and in fact is directly responsible for enabling what has taken place. October the 7th is something that took place in Israel, a massive assault of terrible proportions. On October the 8th, Jewry all around the world connected not only to Israel, but to itself. On October the 9th, the rotten demonstrations took place, and the police authorities, instead of subduing these cries for death to the IDF, for globalise the intifada from the river to the sea, rather pushed away Jewish demonstrators who demonstrated for the rights of Israel and the rights of Jewish people in Israel to live peacefully. That was seen, and that enabled more and more demonstrations to take place, and they've been going on for 2 years. And the most important criterion for people like Albanese and for Wong and for Burke is twofold: ostensibly freedom of speech, and number two, I think, unquestionably, their interest in the Muslim voter and the concentration of Muslims in certain seats, which are Labor seats. So that now they're not prepared to come out. And the Prime Minister, even now in his statements, was incapable of mentioning the word Muslim, incapable of mentioning the word Islamic fundamentalism. And we can see the public reaction. The booing of a Prime Minister is a very rare event. And that took place at a big event, this Hazkara on the 8th day of Hanukkah, for the loss of life, the 15 people that died, 12 or 13 who were Jewish and 2 who were non in court there. A police commissioner, a police, whatever her position is, the head of the police in New South Wales, who says this has nothing to do with religion. I mean, absurd statements, and statements that come out on the ABC of a similar ilk from senior reporters, simply wishing to deny what is right in front of them. We've seen 3 iconic centres in Australia, the Opera House, the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Bondi Beach, where attacks on Israel, attacks on Zionists and attacks on Jews verbally and threats of physical violence have been conducted, and there's been no repression of that. We have a feeling, and I have a feeling, the genie is out of the bottle, and this is a portend for the future. Now, people have looked around and seen that these type of attempts, these attacks are happening not only in Australia, in multiple places, but around the world. And we have no choice but to protect ourselves to the best of our ability. But in addition to that, to try and put as much pressure on government as possible to take a responsible action. You know, on the night of the attack, we had I was back in Melbourne. I flew back in Melbourne. We were in Sydney for that weekend 2 weeks ago. We left a little bit earlier. Our children and grandchildren were at the site of Bondi Beach, and by chance left a little bit early. Others had similar experiences. But on that night, we had a tefillah in Melbourne, because Melbourne and Sydney and Perth and every other Jewish community is totally connected with every other Jewish community. And there was a massive police there. By the next day, the police were not seen anymore. And, you know, is that an indication that the heat has gone out of the whole event that took place? It's massive. There's been Islamic fundamentalism. There's been imams and sheikhs who've said the most terrible things, and very little has happened to stop it. There's been no threat. There's been no threat that if people cross the borders of civilized behavior, that they will be deported, which is something which is a very powerful threat were it to be made. Now there's new legislation coming in, but it's after the event. The Jewish community in Australia has had a tremendous shock, but I have to tell you, the Australian population, the same. There was a survey that was conducted in the last few days, 1,400 people. 72% believe that there needs to be a royal commission to properly assess what has taken place. So this sort of thing cannot happen again. This is the biggest terrorist attack that's happened on the Australian territory of this nature. There was Port Arthur. There was this terrible attack in Christchurch with 51 dead. But this is a massive, massive thing. And the writing, as both the Brigadier General said and the Minister has said, was writing on the wall. And the Combat Antisemitism movement, which conducted its international forum here on the Gold Coast in Queensland, made these statements very, very clear. This was all ignored. The Jerusalem Institute takes its responsibilities for providing research and information both within Israel and globally as it pertains to both the Israeli community and the Jewish community all over. We take it very seriously, and that is why I thank Brigadier General Kuperwasser and Major General Amidror for coming on board to lead this discussion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. If I read what you're saying, is that even though there are some progress signs in Australia, it's not necessarily enough. And maybe the writing is still on the wall.
It's definitely not enough. It's definitely not enough because, you know, from the moment there was a bombing of that synagogue in Melbourne, I'm saying the arson attempt, when it was clearly the professionals had done it. And it was clearly that this was masterminded overseas. And Australia ultimately recognised that. They banned the IRGC. The Iranian ambassador was sent packing from Australia. But it didn't lead from point 2 + 2 = 4, because the next thing to do was to clamber down on every community where we know this information is coming out. And these people aren't feeling the threat that needs to happen. And I've said it repeatedly, people in our community have to be prepared to scream out very, very loud, very aggressively and consistently and persistently to both government members. I wrote to a government member today challenging him to stand up and ignore what the Prime Minister is trying to do, which is to divert attention to gun legislation and actually do something serious about this. Only 2 Labor members have actually stood up and said, no, we need to do more. And Israel has to continue. It should ignore those critics who say the Prime Minister, Bibi, should not interfere. It'll be okay for President Herzog. It's not. If we care about the Jewish people, we have to keep doing it. And we have to call upon other nations to come on board too, because what happens in Australia could be copied in Canada and could be copied in France, it could be copied in these other countries that Minister Chikli referred to. We have to, there was a resolution, Zionism is racism. It took 17 years or something later to it be reversed from 1975. And the same thing can happen now. If Australia stands up and puts an end to this nonsense, this can protect other communities around the world.
Thank you. Which brings me to Major General Amidror. What can we expect next in this battle, and what needs to be done?
Okay. I think it's a very important issue because that will join us in the next years all around the world. I'm not an expert for anti-Semitism, for not anti-Semitism in Australia, which up till the last few years was kind of had an immunity from anti-Semitism. It was known that Australia is not a place in which anti-Semitism is flourishing. What happened is that unlike what was historically the classical Zionist vision that the establishing of the state for the Jewish people will put less pressure on Jews around the world, and anti-Semitism will not have a good place to flourish. On the contrary, we see in the last few years that the combination of Islamist ideas and far radical liberal views are joining hands together and bring to the world a new kind of anti-Semitism, which is not like the classical right-wing anti-Semitism which was known in Europe for many, many years. On the contrary, it is coming from the far left and the Islamic movement, and unimaginable. It's two movements which do not have any shared values, no value that they can agree on, but one: anti-Semitism. About women that think different, about the democracy that think differently, about the economy they think differently, about everything. They have different views, but in one area they agree. It's the hatred of Jews around the world. It is clear that the more aggressive side of this movement is the Islamist side. The Islamist side of this movement is aggressive, is ready to take measures that even the far left wing people are not ready to take. They are ready to demonstrate against Jews, to act against Jews in the academia, and so on and so forth. But it's very rare to see them taking weapon and killing Jews. This part of the anti-Semite movement, in this joint venture between the far liberal and the Islamist, is in the hands of the Islamist. So the conclusion from all this kind of try to understand what we are facing is that if there is a real wish to stop at least the violation of the anti-Semite movement, at least the killing of Jews by those who are in the anti-Semite, within the anti-Semite groups, the only way to do it is to fight totally the extremist Islam in those countries. If government, police, and civil organization do not agree to take all the measures against the Islamists, at the end of the day, the Jews will be killed again and again by those people. Because, yes, there is a joint venture between the very far liberal side of the society and the Islamists. But those, at the end of the day, are conducting the terror operation, killing Jews all around the world. In most of the cases, probably 95% of the cases, are the Islamists. And the way to deal with this terrorism is to fight the extreme Islam movement in all these countries. It's not only Hamas, it's other movements as well. I don't know to whom these two guys from Sydney had been connected to. They had been in the Philippines, I don't know. But wherever you go and you try to understand who at the end of the day used the weapon to kill the Jews, put the gun on their head and kill them, in 95% of these occasions, these are Islamists, and those who are ignoring the clear connection between the extreme Islam and the killing of the Jews are not ready to face the reality. This is the reality. And all those who are ignoring it, I saw it was in The Economist, it was reported about the event about the massacre in Bondi. Jews were not mentioned and Muslims were not mentioned. It's just people and killing and so on. But you couldn't understand from the report of the Economist that it was Muslims who killed Jews. Never mentioned in the report. I have it in my phone because everyone which is asking me, first of all, I'm reading him the report of the Economist, and it is very interesting to see because it's supposed to be a report that will be close to the reality, and you have a report without one word about it's interesting to see how it was reported, and I think that this is the problem. If you don't take seriously the fact that these are Muslims who are killing Jews, you will not have a solution to the problem at the end of the day. And I'm not speaking about the broad anti-Semitism movement, which people try, and the mayor of New York is doing it very well, to differentiate between Jews and Israel and Zionism. He's not anti-Jews, he's only anti-Israeli and anti-Zionist. I'm speaking about the violation, the fact that at the end of the day it's ended by killing Jews. This is done by Muslims, by extreme Islam, members of extreme Islam movement, formally or not formally. And if that is not taken very seriously by the authorities, they will not stop the killing of the Jews.
Thank you, Amidror. It rhymes with what Minister Chikli was saying, that immigration and other steps are necessary in fighting this violence, this terrorism. Let's go to Dr. Dallal.
I'm not sure that the issue is there, because you can bring immigrants which are not part of or are not members or are not supporters of extreme Islam. It's not the immigration, it's the immigration of extreme Islam into those countries. It is very specific.
That's what Chikli was talking about, because such people have been brought in without any investigation whatsoever.
Yes, it's very specific.
No vetting. The problem is there's no vetting.
No vetting was done of people from. They brought in 2,922 people from Gaza, for example. No vetting. Very serious.
Jacob.
Okay, so I'll just.
What is your understanding from an academic point of view about what's going on?
Well,
I ask it also because one of the issues that is always mentioned when we talk about anti-Semitism is the need to handle it through education, and nobody spoke about education until now. So I'm wondering if we don't have to educate.
Right. So yeah, just a few short points. First of all, about education. General Amidror mentioned The Economist. That's not an Islamic publication, and that's not a far right publication. That's a mainstream liberal publication, like most of journalism is. And the reason, and so the deep-seated root of this sort of inability to distinguish or inability to report things as they are is part of a sort of a malaise within Western society that has taken hold of the academy. And it's from there that sort of this liberal view has turned into a very far left progressive liberal view, of which there are no bad oppressors, and there are only freedom fighters on that side. I'm saying it in the extreme. And then when it comes time to report on a massacre of Jewish people, it's very hard to say the word Jew, and it's very hard to say the word Muslim. So I think that the deep root of this is in the academy and in the society. So I think that's a societal challenge. One thing I would say, zooming out, is that this is not, as Rabbi Sachs once said, anti-Semitism is not a problem of the Jews, it's a problem of the anti-Semites. And a society that tolerates anti-Semitism will eventually become intolerant to all religions and to speech and to everything else. So I think looking at it in the broader view, one needs to coalesce a large non-Jewish community around this, because a terror attack killing that many people on a beach is a terrible thing for Australia. It doesn't matter who was killed. So I think this is an Australian problem, and the Australian people need to solve the problem through their government. So I worked at the Ministry of Strategic Affairs for 5 years. We dealt at the time with the issues around BDS and delegitimization. And one of the key takeaways we found was that the best tool for fighting this thing is a legislative tool. In the United States, there are a majority of states which hold anti-BDS legislation, and that is a bulwark against the spread of economic BDS against Israel in the world. So I think that you have in Australia an excellent plan to combat anti-Semitism on paper, as I'm sure you know. Take one or two or three legislative and translate one or two or three legislative items from the report, or that you can glean from the report, and translate them into specific legislation and use that as a rallying cry. Because as you can legislate more, as it goes into the books, then it becomes harder. Then it becomes harder for these people to operate. And specifically in the legislation piece, the issue of anti-terror is paramount, because no one wants ISIS-inspired people or ISIS-trained people in Australia. No one wants Iranian mercenaries in Australia. And if you can produce effective anti-terror legislation that is enforced, I think that that's a first step towards fighting this in the long term. So I would say two things. First of all, in the background, there is the university, there is the education, there's the spirit of the times, and that needs to be focused on as a long-term project. And again, this isn't a Jewish project, it's a Western project, it's an Australian project for Australia. And secondly, trying to leverage this horrible incident to create specific focused legislation, possibly anti-terror legislation, which can find other audiences in favor of it, which will help reduce the number of people capable of carrying out violent attacks. So there's the long-term and sort of the immediate term, and God help us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Danny, I have a question here from the audience, or a comment, but it's actually a question. Somebody says that maybe the gestures of President Herzog in trying to communicate with the Australian government and legitimizing in a way the current government is a wrong move in combating the anti-Semitism in Australia. What is your opinion about that?
Look, I think President Herzog will say all the right things. He will try and put pressure on the government, and he'll do the right thing. I don't think it undermines the Israeli government. It doesn't undermine us either. The fact that a minister came out that the Australian the visa facilities are extended for a minister, and particularly a minister like Minister Chikli, who has got strong views, means that the door is open. You know, we brought out United Solar, and with the assistance of the embassy in Australia, Australian embassy in Israel, we managed to get them visas within 4 hours. So the psychotherapists came here. The doors are not closed. I think that there will. I'm hopeful that there will be a change. I think President Herzog will only contribute positively.
Okay. I'll say a few notes to wrap it up on time. First of all, I think that we need to fight terrorism. That's something's clear. This takes much greater effort by the governments to collect the information necessary in order to be able to foil terror attempts. And when it comes to vetting immigrants is one thing, but it's also collecting the information that we should know about people that plan to carry out terror attacks. It's not easy. To expect Israel to be able to point at somebody from a suburb of Sydney that is about to carry out an attack is beyond what the Israelis can do, or beyond what you should expect from the Israelis. Maybe they can do that from time to time, but you cannot expect them to do that. So the local authorities have to be much more capable in doing that. And we need in this respect also better preparedness for securing the events of the Jewish community and securing the facilities of the Jewish community, as Danny referred to before. And I thought that the security situation in Bondi Beach was inadequate for an event of the size and the magnitude that it was supposed to be.
And you were 100% right. And you, in fact, wanted to write that. And I wrote to you saying, you know, let's check and so on. And it turns out that you were correct. There were only 2 or 3 police assigned there. And beyond that, it comes out today that the organisers of the event asked the police to provide more police, and that was simply ignored. So you were 100% correct in your assessment.
That's why I'm coming from the intelligence.
Right.
The second thing, I think it's very important to go with what Jacob Dallal said about legislation. It's critical. It gives the power to the government to do what needs to be done. And if there's going to be a legislation, I remember the 49 articles that were suggested by the Australian envoy to fighting anti-Semitism. If many of those articles are going to be translated into legislation, the situation is going to be better because it would require the government to follow the law. And if this law is going to not allow shouting globalized intifada or from the river to the sea and things like that, it's going to be much better because we have to understand that my theory about how these things happen is the popcorn theory. When you incite and you are allowed to incite uninterruptedly, eventually somebody is going to be affected by this incitement. You don't have to know that this person is going to be called by this name or that name, but somebody is going to be affected by this incitement and would understand this incitement as a call for action. And that's exactly what's happening with radical Islamists around the globe, including in Australia. So you have to fight against the incitement and have a law that will allow you to fight against incitement, because there's always going to be raised the issue of freedom of speech and all kinds of other liberal points of view which are in place in general. But when it eventually brings about such a threat to the security of a certain group of people, that's something that cannot be tolerated. And in order to bring about this legislation, we have to continue working hard on education. It's because people are not going to vote for these steps if they are not educated to understand the dangers that go along with not doing so. So it's another issue that have to be continued, this education effort, and to work against education for anti-Semitism. This is happening all over the world, and including in the United States itself. Things have to be done in order to prevent that. As was mentioned by Mr. Chikli, the efforts of the Qataris and the Iranians and the Turks and the others, including non-Muslim countries, to promote, even in K6 to 12, education that denies Israel's right to exist, is something that we have to be aware of and take action against. But all of that is not enough. In my mind, what we have come up with from this webinar is that those basic things are not enough anymore. We need more. We need to understand that we are dealing here with the convergence of terrorism and anti-Semitism, and that we have to apply methods that we used in order to fight terrorism to the battle against anti-Semitism. And this means much more funding and better organization in order to deal with this matter, not leave it as a minor issue that we should not be really concerned about. It's a new situation that we are facing. If we are not going to do that, we shall have, the writing, as I said, is still on the wall. In my mind, we are going to have more terror attacks if we are not going to wake up. And look, we are only 2 weeks after Bondi Beach. The amount of attention given to this problem is decreasing, of course, and we cannot allow that to happen. And so we fight against anti-Semitism as if it is terrorism, then we shall have better results. And lastly, we have to understand, we have to communicate it, that this is not a problem of the Jews. This is the problem of everybody. Everybody who cares about the philosophy and the freedoms that we would like to enjoy have to fight against anti-Semitism and make sure that it doesn't flourish. And this is not easy to convince everybody, because many people say, well, it's a problem of the Jews. Let the Jews deal with it. And the Jews try to deal with that. And Minister Chikli spoke about what the government of Israel is doing and how we are trying to encourage other countries to take steps, but it cannot stay with the Jews, and you cannot expect the Jewish communities around the globe to protect themselves with their own armies. They are not going to have big enough armies in order to do that. So the states have to take their share and understand if they fail, they have a price to pay. And what we are seeing in Australia is the attempt of the government not to pay a price for the failure. It's not unique for Australia, but no government wants to pay the price of its failures. But in Australia as well, and this is a pity, because if you're not willing to say I made a mistake, then and I think Prime Minister Albanese government made many mistakes. You're not going to improve in the future, and that's a pity. So we have a lot of things to do. Sorry. Yes,
I have to convey that it's my personal view. The majority of Australians were all shocked by everything that took place. The majority of Australians do not want to see the Jewish community suffering anti-Semitism at all. This is instigated from outside and found a fertile territory amongst the Islamic supporters here and the left-wing woke community. that, as Amidror has identified, should not be bedfellows, but in fact are. And a lot of the media, and particularly the main media, the Australian and the Sky News and others, have all identified this and feel that. Nevertheless, there's a requirement for us, for our communal leadership, to be staunch in demanding of government, and that has started to happen, that they need to respond legislatively and by police action in blocking this sort of activity. And that has begun to take place. What ultimately, I express my own opinion, but I think that we will need a change of government to get a serious response to this. As we conclude this session, I have some very sad news to announce that Yossi, I wanted to share with you, but I didn't want to do it beforehand. A community leader and major contributor died today. Stanley Roth.
Oh, really?
Passed away suddenly today. And his levaya will be on Tuesday, apparently. This is a massive shock. He was strongly committed to supporting this institute, recognising the importance of its work for strategy and security for Israel and Jewish communities. I'm terribly shocked, and I'm announcing it now because I was given permission to announce it.
And I exchanged some emails with him yesterday.
You had contact with him over the last couple of days. He was indicating that he couldn't be involved in this webinar because of a family simcha. And unfortunately, that has come to a very sad end. We wish his family arichut yamim, and we send condolences from JISS and from everybody here to Charmaine and her family. And you talk about Australia's anti-Semitism envoy, Gillian Siegel. She was Stanley's sister-in-law. Gillian is married to Stanley's brother, and she's the one who's done incredible work, which the government has resisted implementing. You referred to it, but that's how close we all are to each other. We can only wish for better days ahead for everybody. Thank you, Yossi, for putting this together, and I hope all those who've joined in will have a better understanding now of how we need to press forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you for everybody else who participated, Jacob and Mr. Chikli. Thank you very much for the audience. And with this said note, said news, we shall conclude this meeting.